What to tell you about Lenin? Well, Lenin had a tough task. If you think about where he started in opposition as the leader of the Bolshevik party, which wasn't even the biggest party in opposition. And somehow, through part fortune, good fortune, circumstances, but also through skill and his sheer force of personality, he managed to assume control of certainly geographically, the largest country on our planet. But he did so whilst Russia was still involved in the First World War. He took a great risk. He agreed to sign a peace treaty with Germany, which is called the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. And yes, I did say Brest. So that usually sticks in your head for exams, though the Litovsk bit less so. And that treaty was incredibly harsh. Russia lost a lot of land, and people were very upset that Lenin was willing to sign this particular treaty. But Lenin gambled that Germany were going to lose the war and Russia would get it all back, which, with some exceptions, they kind of did. And then a civil war broke out with people who tried to regain power. So even when the First World War had been put to one side, Lenin still had people with their knives out to get him. And he managed to weather that as well. There wasn't a lot of time for Lenin to rule Russia in peacetime, and so there's been a great debate since as to what Lenin actually would have wanted from Russia had he been able to have the time to establish the type of socialism or communism or Bolshevism, his particular ideology, onto Russia. A couple of things which you may come across when you come to look at Lenin is his idea about how to organise the economy. First of all, one of the key ones, and it's not strictly first, but it's the one that you might see the most, is war communism, where the whole country is geared for war, for fighting the civil war in particular. And one feature of war communism was grain requisitioning, which basically was Lenin and the Bolsheviks blamed the peasants for hoarding grain for the food shortages which they were experiencing in Russia. So he sent in the troops to go and take grain off the peasants, which led to starvation in the countryside. And it didn't really work because the peasants just hid the grain or did things to disrupt it and tried to stop the grain being hoarded. So the problem in the cities was still bad. It was incredibly unpopular. And when the Civil War was won by the Bolsheviks, he got rid of war communism and introduced something called the New Economic Policy, which was also not entirely popular, though it did help to improve the Russian economy a little bit. It wasn't entirely popular because it seemed to abandon the principles of Bolshevism, of communism, because it allowed some capitalist elements. Lenin, like some of the other rulers, suffered from people trying to kill him. And in actual fact, what really finished him off was an assassin who didn't manage to kill him, but injured him to the extent that his health failed after that, and it was kind of downhill from there. He ended up dying, but just before he died, well, there was a number of... you can imagine the situation. When a king dies, it's usually fairly obvious who's going to take over. It'll be from a selection of people. But there'd never been a communist country before, and Lenin was the leader. There were a few people who you would sort of call Lenin's cronies, the people who were in what might be termed the vanguard of the revolution, who could have taken over from Lenin. One of those people was Joseph Stalin. The other main candidate was Leon Trotsky, who maybe if you'd been standing there next to Lenin on his deathbed, you might have said Trotsky was a favourite to take the position, but he didn't get there in the end. Stalin manoeuvred his way through making alliances, through being ruthless and politically cunning. He managed to take up the position of the most powerful person in the Communist Party. But interestingly, it seems that Lenin didn't really want Stalin to be his successor. We'll look at Stalin in one of the other videos.